June 18th, 1944, near Carentan, Normandy. The night smells of burned fuel and wet earth. Flak still echoes somewhere to the east, dull and irregular, like a door slamming far down a corridor. Above the hedgerows, low clouds glow faintly orange where fires still burn on the horizon. If you stand still long enough, you can hear the distant cough of engines, Allied fighters returning from late patrols, one by one, or at least they should be. Captain Arthur Red Collins, U.S. Army Air Force's engineering officer, kneels at the edge of what used to be a runway and runs his hand through loose gravel and shattered asphalt. His fingers come back blackened with tar and dust. The Luftwaffe has been here tonight. Again. 6 bombs, spaced carefully. Not random. Not rushed. A professional pattern meant to cripple the field, not destroy it outright. Deep craters punched through the runway at staggered intervals, designed to make repairs slow, frustrating, and, most importantly, visible from the air. A denial strike. Pierced steel planking. PSP. The Luftwaffe doesn't know it yet, but the night they just spent planning, flying and risking scarce fuel and pilots has already failed. A sergeant jogs over, breath fogging in the cool air. "Sir, crater survey's done." Collins stands, brushing grit from his knees. "How bad?" "Worst one's 12 feet across, maybe 5 deep. Others are smaller." Collins nods once. "Good." The sergeant blinks. "Good, sir. Means they didn't hit the sub-base," Collins says, "or the fuel dump, or the revetments." He looks back at the broken runway. This is just work. You don't see the war from here the way pilots do. There's no sky full of tracers, no spiraling aircraft, no dramatic explosions frozen in memory. There's just damage and a clock. Because at dawn, fighters need to take off, and if they can't, the Luftwaffe wins something it desperately needs: time. The Germans learned this lesson the hard way. In 1943, bombing an airfield usually worked. Concrete runways took days to repair. Specialized equipment was needed. Supply chains stretched thin. A single well-placed raid could ground an entire wing. But by the summer of 1944, the Allies are no longer playing the same game. Back in England, months before D-Day, engineers like Collins studied aerial reconnaissance photos of bombed British airfields from the Blitz. They catalogued crater sizes, soil types, repair times. They timed how long it took to fill holes under ideal conditions and under fire. Then they planned for worse: portable airfields, temporary strips, runways that didn't need to be perfect, only functional. And above all, speed. Collins snaps his flashlight on, briefly, then off again, tracing the outline of the largest crater in his mind. "Start here," he says, pointing. "Fill compact plank. I want a straight takeoff run by first light." The men don't argue. They fan out immediately. Bulldozers crawl forward, engines muffled, pushing loose soil back into the crater. Others follow with shovels, tamping down earth by hand where machines can't reach. The rhythm is practiced, almost calm. No shouting, no rushing, just motion. Above them, the sky remains quiet. The Luftwaffe has already gone home, convinced they've done their job. They will be back tomorrow night. They always are. And every night they will see the same thing. Bombs falling, runways broken, and by morning, aircraft airborne again. That's what keeps them guessing. Because denial bombing only works if damage accumulates. And here it never does. By 0300 hours, the first crater is filled and leveled. PSP panels are dragged into place by 4 men at a time, their edges clanging softly as they're locked together. The steel flexes slightly underweight, then settles. It doesn't look elegant. It doesn't need to. At the far end of the strip, mechanics work by hooded lanterns on a P-47 Thunderbolt, rearming it for the morning. 50 cal belts are fed carefully into wing bays. Fuel hoses snake across the ground. A pilot sits on an ammo crate nearby, helmet resting on his knee, watching the engineers work. He glances at Collins as the captain passes. "They get us tonight?" the pilot asks. Collins nods. "They tried." The pilot looks at the runway taking shape behind him, then back at his aircraft. "And tomorrow?" Collins allows himself a thin smile. "Tomorrow, you fly." That certainty, quiet, unspoken, is what the Luftwaffe never sees from the air. They see damage. They assume delay. They plan their next strike based on yesterday's success. But what they don't understand yet is that this airfield isn't meant to last. It's meant to recover. And as dawn begins to thin the darkness, as the first bird song returns to the hedgerows, the repaired strip stretches out across the field, scarred, patched, imperfect, and completely usable. Somewhere over France, German pilots are already studying maps, marking targets, convinced that one more night of bombing will finally ground Allied air power here. They have no idea how wrong they are. June 19th, 1944, 05:45 hours, same airfield. The sun rises reluctantly, filtered through low Normandy cloud and drifting smoke. Dew clings to grass flattened by vehicles and boots. The air is cold enough that breath still shows, but not cold enough to stop engines. Captain Arthur Collins stands just off the edge of the runway as the first P-47 rolls forward. The patched strip looks wrong in daylight. Steel panels cut across repaired asphalt like scars. Fresh earth shows darker than the surrounding ground. In places, the surface dips almost imperceptibly, where compaction wasn't perfect. It should not work. That's what every German aerial photograph will say later. But the Thunderbolt doesn't care. The pilot pushes the throttle forward. The engine's growl deepens into a roar that vibrates through Collins's chest. Dust lifts. Loose gravel skitters away from the prop wash. The aircraft accelerates. For a heartbeat, Collins watches the wheels, half expecting a wobble, a skid, something to go wrong. Nothing does. The P-47 lifts cleanly, climbing into the grey sky, gear retracting smoothly as it banks east. Another follows, then another. By 06:30, 12 fighters are airborne, exactly as scheduled. This is the moment the Luftwaffe never witnesses. Their reconnaissance photos will show craters. Their pilots will report hits. Their commanders will mark the airfield as temporarily neutralized. And they will be wrong. Across occupied France, this pattern is repeating itself with unnerving consistency. At advanced landing grounds, ALGs, hastily carved out of fields, meadows, and abandoned farmland, Allied engineers are doing something that violates pre-war air doctrine. They are accepting damage, not repairing it perfectly, just fast enough. The German Air Force still believes in permanence, concrete runways, hardened infrastructure, airfields as fixed assets that must be protected or lost. The Allies have abandoned that idea entirely. Airfields are now consumable, disposable, and infinitely replaceable. By late June, German night fighters and bombers are flying denial missions almost every night. They drop small loads with precision, aiming not to destroy hangars or aircraft. Those are often empty or dispersed, but to crater runways just enough to halt operations. It worked once. It worked twice. Then it stopped working at all. In a Luftwaffe operations room near Paris, Hauptmann Ernst Keller studies aerial photos taken at dawn. He leans closer, frowning. "Here," he says, tapping a finger on the print. "Crater. Fresh." Another officer nods. "And here. And here." Keller straightens. "Then why are they flying?" No one answers. Because the photos don't show the steel. They don't show PSP. Pierced steel planking, stacked by the thousands in Allied depots, loaded onto trucks, dragged across fields at night, laid down by men who have done it so often, they no longer think about it. PSP doesn't photograph well. It reflects light inconsistently. It blends into dirt. It looks temporary. Because it is. And that's the point. By July, the Luftwaffe has a problem it cannot quantify. Every bombed airfield should be down for at least a day. Most are down for hours. Some never stop flying at all. Pilots report seeing craters on approach and being engaged by fighters launched from those same fields minutes later. One German ace will later describe it as fighting an enemy whose wounds closed overnight. On the ground, Collins and his men live on a cycle that barely acknowledges the day. Night, repair. Morning, launch. Afternoon, refuel, rearm, expand. Evening, disperse aircraft, camouflage, wait. They sleep in short shifts, boots still on. They eat when they can. Their reward is not rest. It's predictability. Because predictability means the system is holding. One evening, as dusk settles, Collins sits on the hood of a truck and watches engineers stack unused PSP panels back under camouflage netting. A young lieutenant joins him, helmet under his arm. "Sir," he says, "you ever think about what happens if they actually knock us out? Like really knock us out?" Collins doesn't answer right away. He looks across the field where aircraft sit in revetments, spaced far apart, angled so blast won't jump from one to another. "Then we move," he says finally. "Move where?" "Anywhere flat enough to land," Collins replies. "That's the difference." The lieutenant nods slowly. He's beginning to understand what the Luftwaffe never will. This isn't about protecting an airfield. It's about denying the enemy certainty. The Germans bomb expecting delay. The Allies repair expecting damage. Only one of those expectations is reliable. By mid-July, German planners are trapped. If they ignore the airfields, Allied fighters dominate the skies by day. If they bomb them, the damage is erased by morning. Worse, denial raids consume resources the Luftwaffe cannot replace. Fuel, aircraft, trained crews, for effects that last hours at best. Every night becomes a gamble, and every morning that Allied aircraft take off, as if nothing happened, makes that gamble feel pointless. At one ALG outside Saint-Lô, a German reconnaissance plane photographs a runway, so torn up it looks abandoned. By noon, 12 Typhoons launch from it. By evening, the Luftwaffe strikes it again. By dawn, it's flying again. The pattern drives German intelligence into frustration. Reports contradict expectations. Maps lie. Assumptions collapse. And through it all, the engineers keep working us. Silent, methodical, anonymous. Collins walks the runway one last time before night falls, checking seams, tapping panels with his boot. Somewhere to the east, flak starts up again. He looks up at the sky, already darkening. "They'll be back," a sergeant says beside him. Collins nods. "Let them, because the real victory isn't in stopping the bombs. It's in making sure the bombs don't matter." July 2nd, 1944, northern France. The bombers come just before midnight. You hear them before you see them. A low, distant drone that grows steadily louder, vibrating through the chest long before it reaches the ear. The sound carries differently at night, flattened by cloud cover, distorted by humidity. To an experienced listener, it's unmistakable. Twin engines, medium altitude, not a saturation raid, a denial strike. Captain Arthur Collins is already awake when the first flares drift down, hissing softly as they fall. They bathe the airfield in a sickly white glow, turning revetments into jagged shadows and exposing the patched runway like an open wound. "Take cover!" someone shouts unnecessarily. The engineers are already moving. Bombs hit in staggered sequence, sharp, violent flashes, followed by rolling concussions that punch the breath out of your lungs, even from 100 yards away. Earth jumps. Steel rattles. PSP panels leap and settle again like struck piano keys. One bomb lands short of the runway, tearing up a supply track. Another punches a fresh crater directly into yesterday's repair. Collins presses his helmet down and waits for the last explosion. Then silence. No second wave. No follow-up. The Luftwaffe never lingers anymore. They can't afford to. As soon as the all-clear is given, lanterns flicker to life across the field, hooded, directional, controlled. Bulldozers crawl forward, shovels scrape, steel grinds against steel. The choreography resumes. This is the moment the German pilots imagine matters most. It doesn't, because by now, Collins's men don't measure success by whether the runway is damaged. They measure it by how fast it stops being damaged. A crater team moves in, assessing depth and soil composition in seconds. Another team drags pre-cut PSP panels from a nearby stack, already sized to fit standard bomb diameters. Someone chalks a number on the edge of the hole. Repair time, 90 minutes. That estimate is conservative. By 0200, the hole is filled, compacted, plated, and rolled. A truck drives across it deliberately, testing load-bearing strength. The steel flexes, holds. At 0300, Collins radios operations, runway serviceable. On the other side of the channel, in a Luftwaffe night operations center, a junior intelligence officer pins up the latest raid assessment. Airfield damaged. Operational status unknown. That word appears again and again in German reports. Unknown. Because reconnaissance photos don't tell the whole story anymore. The Germans see craters. They assume delays. But Allied aircraft keep appearing over the front at dawn, unchanged in number, unchanged in aggression. By early July, German commanders begin to suspect something unsettling. The airfields aren't being repaired slowly. They're being designed to be repaired quickly. That realization arrives too late. Pierced steel planking has changed the arithmetic of air war. Concrete runways required curing time, specialized equipment, skilled labor. PSP requires manpower, muscle, and planning, all things the Allies have in abundance. A crater in concrete is a problem. A crater in dirt is a task. The Luftwaffe adapts, or tries to. They vary bomb sizes, shift aim points, attack dispersal areas instead of runways, drop delayed fuse ordnance to catch repair crews. Sometimes it works. Men are wounded. Equipment is damaged. Repairs slow. But never enough, because redundancy has been built into everything. If one strip is unusable, another opens nearby. If a runway is closed, aircraft launch from taxiways. If one ALG is suppressed for half a day, another takes over its sortie schedule. German planners are fighting a static enemy. The enemy no longer exists. At a briefing outside Caen, a Luftwaffe staff officer voices the frustration openly. "We bomb the same fields night after night," he says, "and every morning the enemy flies as if untouched." A superior responds curtly, "Then bomb harder." "But with what?" the officer asks. That question hangs in the room. Because every denial raid costs Germany aircraft it cannot replace, pilots it cannot train fast enough, fuel it cannot spare. Every night spent bombing runways is a night not spent intercepting bombers, escorting convoys, or defending cities. The Allies understand this. They don't need the Luftwaffe grounded forever. They only need it chasing ghosts. Back on the airfield, Collins watches dawn break again. Pale, cool, indifferent. Another day of flying begins. Another night of German effort rendered meaningless. A Thunderbolt pilot walks past, helmet tucked under his arm. "Rough night?" he asks. Collins glances at the patched strip, at the faint outlines of last night's repairs, already blending into yesterday's scars. "Same as always," he says. That's the nightmare for the Luftwaffe. Not destruction, routine. Because routine means the system is winning. July 24th, 1944. Outside of Ranches, Normandy. The maps on the table are wrong. Major Helmut Brandner knows it the moment he studies them. The lines are clean, confident. Airfields marked as neutralized, bombed, suppressed. Red pencil circles show denial raids flown just hours earlier. On paper, the Allied tactical air forces in this sector should be grounded. Outside, an American fighter screams overhead. Brandner looks up instinctively as the sound fades east, followed seconds later by another. Then another. He closes his eyes. For weeks now, German intelligence officers have been trapped between reports that cannot be reconciled. Pilots swear they cratered runways. Reconnaissance photos confirm damage. Bomb damage assessments look convincing, and yet the aircraft keep coming. Typhoons ripping German columns apart by day. Thunderbolts prowling roads and rail lines. Mustangs circling deep behind the front. The Luftwaffe is doing everything doctrine demands, and achieving nothing lasting. The reason is brutally simple. The Germans are trying to suppress infrastructure. The Allies have turned infrastructure into a consumable. At advanced landing grounds behind the breakout from Normandy, the tempo accelerates to something unprecedented. Airfields leapfrog forward with the ground forces, sometimes opening within hours of an area being secured. Engineers arrive first, not pilots, not mechanics. Engineers. Bulldozers level fields still littered with shell fragments. PSP is laid directly onto soil. Fuel bladders are buried. Ammunition is stacked under camouflage. Within a day, fighters are landing where cows grazed the week before. These fields are never meant to be permanent, which makes them impossible to suppress permanently. Brandner receives a field report from a reconnaissance unit. Enemy airfield observed heavily cratered at 0200 hours, it reads. Enemy aircraft operating from same location at 0700 hours. He underlines the sentence twice. This isn't bad luck, it's design. German pilots feel it in the air. They bomb a strip at night, then face aircraft launched from it the next morning. Aircraft flown by pilots who slept, ate, briefed, and took off on schedule. The psychological effect is corrosive. Success becomes meaningless. Effort feels wasted. Night after night, crews risk their lives to inflict damage that does not endure. Some pilots begin to fly denial raids with less conviction. Others cut corners. Some release early, unwilling to linger over flak for objectives that never stay down. Commanders notice. Morale slides, and with it, precision. Back on the ground, Collins watches the same pattern play out from the opposite angle. Every time the Luftwaffe bombs his field, they reveal something useful. Where they aim, what they prioritize, what they believe matters. And every morning the engineers prove them wrong. One afternoon, Collins is summoned to a briefing with air group staff. Maps are spread out, showing projected advances eastward. We're moving again in 48 hours, a colonel says. Need 2 strips operational by then. 1 primary, 1 fallback. Collins nods. We'll have 3. The colonel raises an eyebrow. 3? 2 for use, Collins replies. 1 to draw bombs. That's the final insult. The Allies now expect airfields to be attacked, and plan around it. They build redundancy not just to survive damage, but to absorb it. German denial raids become part of the Allied schedule. Another variable accounted for. Another problem neutralized not by defense, but by indifference. In August, as Allied forces surge out of Normandy, Luftwaffe planners confront a grim truth. Even if they could destroy every visible airfield, which they cannot, it would not matter. Because the airfields are no longer the center of gravity, the system is, and the system repairs itself faster than it can be broken. On the night of August 7th, German bombers hit an ALG near Le Mans with unusual ferocity. Multiple waves, mixed ordnance, delayed fuses. They achieve something rare. At dawn, the runway is not operational. For 3 hours, aircraft do not launch. German intelligence reports it as a success. By noon, the field is flying again. By evening, a second strip opens nearby. By the next day, the Luftwaffe has lost 2 bombers and 4 trained crewmen. The Allies have lost time, measured in minutes. The imbalance is now irreversible. The Luftwaffe is still fighting to deny air power. The Allies have moved on to exploiting it. And all because, somewhere in Normandy, engineers learned how to make a runway that didn't care if it was broken. September 4th, 1944. Northern France. The Luftwaffe still flies at night. That is what the reports say. In reality, the flights have become something else. Cautious, abbreviated, almost symbolic. Bomb loads are lighter. Routes are indirect. Crews avoid known flak belts and turn back early at the first hint of trouble. Captain Arthur Collins notices the change not in explosions, but in absence. The nights are quieter now. Not silent. Never silent. But the deliberate, systematic denial raids that once cratered his runways with clockwork precision have thinned to scattered attacks, poorly coordinated and often misdirected. One evening, Collins stands with a mug of bitter coffee and watches darkness settle over an ALG carved out of a harvested field. PSP panels glint faintly under camouflage netting. Fighters sit dispersed, ready. Nothing happens. An hour passes, then another. A sergeant finally speaks what everyone is thinking. "Sir, you think they're done?" Collins shakes his head. No. They just can't afford it anymore. That is the end state the Luftwaffe never planned for. Denial bombing is only effective if you can repeat it, night after night, week after week. It assumes endurance. Germany no longer has it. By late summer 1944, the Luftwaffe is bleeding pilots faster than it can train them, aircraft faster than factories can replace them, fuel faster than it can be refined or transported. Every mission must justify itself, and bombing an airfield that will be operational again by dawn no longer does. German commanders face a brutal calculation: spend resources denying Allied airfields for hours, or attempt desperately to defend German cities, bridges, rail yards, and retreating armies from daylight annihilation. They choose the latter. The denial campaign fades not because it fails tactically, but because it fails strategically. It cannot change outcomes. Across France and into Belgium, Allied engineers continue to perform the same ritual, even as the threat diminishes. Crater, fill, compact, plate, test, fly. The process is now so ingrained that younger engineers treat it as routine maintenance, not emergency repair. Manuals are updated, timetables refined. Supply officers know exactly how many PSP panels a night's work consumes. What began as improvisation has become doctrine. German POWs notice it first. Captured Luftwaffe ground crewmen, questioned in makeshift cages near airfields, struggle to understand what they are seeing. "You repair faster than we can damage," one says flatly. An American officer replies, "We planned for that." The difference between the two armies is no longer measured in courage or skill. It is measured in assumptions. Germany assumed damage would accumulate. The Allies assumed damage was inevitable and planned accordingly. By the time Allied aircraft reach the German border, the Luftwaffe has lost more than control of the skies. It has lost the ability to influence time. Its attacks no longer delay. They no longer disrupt. They no longer shape the enemy's schedule. They simply happen and are absorbed. On a cool September morning, Collins watches a flight of fighters lift off from a strip that has been bombed, repaired, bombed again, and repaired again so many times its surface is a patchwork of steel and scarred earth. He realizes something then. The Luftwaffe was never trying to win the air war here. It was trying to slow it, and that was never going to be enough. Because once an enemy builds a system that expects to be hit and keeps functioning anyway, the attacker runs out of leverage. The nights no longer matter. The bombs no longer matter. Only the mornings do. And every morning the aircraft keep flying. Long after the war, historians will write about air superiority, production numbers, and pilot training. Few will write about the steel planking laid in the dark, about the men who filled craters by lantern light, about the quiet realization that denial only works if repair is slow. But those men understood something fundamental about modern war. You don't win by preventing damage. You win by making damage irrelevant. And somewhere in Normandy, when the Luftwaffe stopped being able to tell whether an airfield was alive or dead, the war in the air was already decided.